the House comes to oral questions. Call on Cameron Brewer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Economic Growth and asks, what are her priorities for the economic growth portfolio?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Mr Speaker, the economic growth portfolio is a significant shift from the previous economic development portfolio. It will have a much greater emphasis on driving and strengthening efforts underway across government to deliver increased economic growth in the years ahead. It will also take responsibility for new initiatives designed to promote growth and productivity in the New Zealand economy. Greater prioritisation and speed of activities across multiple portfolios will help deliver longer-term improvements in productivity and therefore economic growth. Mr Speaker, we can't just spend our way to growth. We have to renew our focus on how to earn it.
Supplementary. Why is economic growth important?
Well, Mr Speaker, while I would hope it would be self-evident...
That's enough.
It has become clear
from the... Sorry, you do not hear me.
It has become clear from the naysaying and no's of many members of this House that they do not understand the importance of economic growth, which is the only way New Zealand can sustainably raise its standard of living. The only way. Economic growth means more opportunities and choices, better paying jobs...
Point of order, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, I don't think a minister can begin their answer by attacking the questioner like that, by saying that they don't understand something that's self-evident.
No, hang on. We're not, excuse me, we're not getting... This is not going to be a great way to start the year, because a couple of people could be on their way shortly. We'll resume the question, but we'll keep it concise. The answer is...
Better paying jobs and the ability to pay for things New Zealanders want and deserve. Healthcare, law and order, education, amongst many others. Economic growth means our children will want to stay here because they see opportunities right here in New Zealand. It doesn't mean working harder or working more hours. Most New Zealanders already do that. It means making our economy more productive.
Supplementary. What recent announcements has she made regarding economic growth?
Mr Speaker, on Monday I joined Immigration Minister Erica Stanford and Tourism Minister Louise Upston to announce the relaxation of visitor visa requirements to allow tourists to work remotely while visiting New Zealand. This means that digital nomads will be able to work remotely for up to 9 months for a foreign employer while they are holidaying here. Mr Speaker, tourism is New Zealand's second largest export earner, generating revenue of almost $11 billion and creating nearly 200,000 jobs. This change will enable visitors to extend their stays and lead to more money being spent in New Zealand. That's good for our businesses and for incomes, and it's good for growth.
Supplementary. What reaction has she seen to the recent economic growth announcement?
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to report that the message is getting out on the world stage that New Zealand is open for business. The BBC and New York Times carried the digital nomad story, and I'm informed that the BBC's Instagram post has had over 100,000 likes within just a few hours. Brett O'Reilly, an APEC Business Advisory Council member, says he has been contacted by people interested in taking up the opportunity, including Americans affected by fires around LA. I've also, Mr Speaker, seen a report from a commentator stating that in 2024 the New Zealand economy will be strong and resilient.
Sorry, someone calling out over there. We'll have the whole question answer repeated if we're just going to keep barracking like that.
Mr Speaker, the quote continues, and that part of that will come from digital nomads calling New Zealand home while using the international time difference to work productively and remotely. Mr Speaker, that insightful view is from none other than the leader of the Labour Party, Chris Hipkins, in a speech to a Labour Party regional conference. His support is welcome too.
Question number 2, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Goodness gracious, Mr Speaker. I think you should withdraw and apologise immediately, Mr Speaker.
I withdraw and apologise. The Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, to the Prime Minister, does he stand by all of his government statements and actions?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, because this year we are saying yes to economic growth. We have said yes to a trade deal with the UAE to boost exports and lift incomes. We've said yes to Invest New Zealand so we can attract more foreign direct investment in New Zealand into infrastructure and energy and manufacturing. We said yes to digital nomads. We actually did something about it. We said yes to more tourism and more hospitality. And most importantly today, we said yes to speed limits going up and getting Kiwis moving faster and freight moving faster. And isn't it great that a backbench MP like Mike Butteritt can get it done when a minister with an absolute majority of transport and the local MP couldn't do so?
Supplementary. When did Nicola Willis ask the Treasury?
No, you're entitled to silence. I just want to say to the government, if you want the opposition to be quiet all through answers to questions, then I think probably outbursts like that aren't terribly helpful.
When did Nicola Willis ask the Treasury to produce a list of public assets that could be privatised, and did the Cabinet agree to that course of action?
Well, again, as I've said very clearly, asset sales are off the table for this term. What we're focused on is economic growth. Of course, we will look at the performance of our state-owned enterprises because many of them are underperforming and they need a good curry-up and they need to deliver.
Order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the Prime Minister when Nicola Willis asked the Treasury to produce the list. The Prime Minister and Nicola Willis both said to the media yesterday that they had done that. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask him to answer the question that I actually asked.
Point of order. Nicola Willis.
My statements are being misrepresented by the Leader of the Opposition. What I have said is that I have asked for a request on the purpose of the state-owned enterprises that we earn and for advice on their performance and ways of improving that performance. For the Leader of the Opposition to characterise it otherwise is false and untrue.
But the
Supplementary.
The underlying point is that in an exchange like this, addressing a question is the way to go, but as the member well knows, questions in the nature of yes and no are not able to be required.
A supplementary question to the Prime Minister. When did Nicola Willis ask for the list that she just referred to in her point of order, and did the Cabinet agree to that course of action?
What we're focused on is making sure we get better performance out of those state-owned enterprises. It's quite normal, as we want to make sure we've got excellence, that capital is being well deployed and that the performance of those organisations is improving. There'll be a range of us about their performance. That's all that's happened here.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
I think it's pretty straightforward. You can't answer with any argue with any assertions in the question, given I'm using Nicola Willis's own words. I simply asked him when it was asked for.
And the Prime Minister might like to expand on his answer.
I'm not aware of when it's asked for. You could ask that question to the Minister of Economic Growth if you wish.
Why should the public have confidence that he knows what's going on in his government, that when he tells them that asset sales aren't something that are being actively considered, that they believe him, when he doesn't actually know?
Asset sales are not being discussed, debated or delivered in this parliamentary term. I don't know how to be any clearer with the member of the opposition. I've said very, very clearly there will be no asset sales this term, period.
Supplementary question.
Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does the Prime Minister mean that there's been something learnt from the privatisation of a Labor regime that sold BNZ part sale and went bankrupt? The Quality Inns deal, totally corrupt. The Kiwi Rail deal, they went bankrupt as well. And Electricorp, which was sold, and no, sunshine. Electricorp. Excuse me. I'll explain that.
Sorry, it's just
this is not student politics, this is reality here.
Questions are asked in silence. It doesn't matter who is interrupting. If they do it again, they'll be gone.
Mr. Speaker.
No, he's going to get to ask his question with silence.
Well, point of order, Mr. Speaker.
A point of order.
That question cannot contain an assertion that is factually incorrect. The sale of railway, which Mr. Peters just referred to, happened under a government that he was a minister in.
Correct. I think you should let him finish his question entirely.
If he's rather more patient, he will remember that the Labour Party's position was on Kiwi Rail circa 1992.
Good.
So I got it. That they said they agreed with. Okay, here we go. Learned anything from the part sale, never went to tender in 1987 of BNZ, which went bankrupt by 1990. The Quality Ends deal, which is totally corrupt. The Kiwi Rail deal, which was 99.2, but the Labour Party said they agreed with the sale, but not its timing, for Electric Corp, which sold for 8 months' earnings. Have we learned nothing from that?
Table. Point of order.
I've got to find a new job. This will get too easy.
Sorry. One of the things that might fascinate people a little bit, or possibly won't fascinate them, but it will, I think, be useful information, is that while I've got pretty good hearing, I've been worried about missing stuff in the house. So I've now got these hearing aids in, and I'm hearing far too much. But a consequence of that is I'm going to hear some things from both sides that'll probably cause a reaction from me that would be somewhat untypical. So let's just calm everything down.
Point of order. Point of order.
Point of order.
Can I just bring your attention to Speaker's Ruling 1975?
Can you start again? I was still talking when you started.
Can I bring your attention to Speaker's Rulings 1975, particularly since the member who asked or stood up earlier cares a lot about parliamentary standards, that the whole idea of supplementary questions is not to make a range of political statements about an issue, but to dig into an issue to test the minister's answers. And I seek guidance on how you would move forward with that specific Speaker's ruling.
Good as gold. I'll come back to you. The Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, why should New Zealanders believe him when he says that asset sales aren't something the government's considering, when Nicola Willis is currently preparing the catalogue for the fire sale?
Factorisation of that question. As I've said consistently, before the election, asset sales are off the table over this government. But it is quite appropriate and entirely appropriate that we have state-owned enterprise ministers, a Minister for Finance, that want to make sure that we have high-performing state-owned enterprises. When they haven't been delivering properly, we want to make sure there's excellence. We want to make sure the New Zealand taxpayer who has capital tied up in those assets, that they are delivering well for those taxpayers.
I would just point out to the member asking the question that assertions and questions are just as inappropriate as they are in answers.
Oh, well, if you're going to set that as the standard, Mr Speaker, I'm sure it will be evenly applied across the House. Why should Kiwis believe privatisation and asset sales will leave them better off, given the last national government's privatisation of energy companies led to higher power prices, bigger profits and less investment in electricity generation?
Look, I think the Leader of the Opposition has gone down the rabbit hole, and actually, I don't know how to be any clearer. Asset sales are off the table for this government.
Supplementary question. Why should New Zealanders believe the answer he's just given? When asked the question of asset sales in the House last year, he accused the person asking it of being a conspiracy theorist, only to admit that the government has actually been considering it.
That's right.
The government has been looking at the performance and the excellence and the management of our state-owned enterprises to make sure that the public is getting good return on the capital being employed. The comment I made to the Green member was the idea that you would actually run an organisation down before you sell it. That makes no sense.
That's what they're doing.
Question 3, Mike Buttrick.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Transport and asks, what announcements has he made regarding speed limits?
Mr Speaker, pleased to say this morning the Prime Minister and I announced another commitment of this government has been met, with reversals to the last government's blanket speed limit reductions beginning tonight. They will be in place by the middle of this year. We're focused on speeding up New Zealand's economic growth, and in this case we mean it literally. Mr Speaker, the last government was obsessed with imposing illogical and untargeted speed limit reductions on state highways and local roads. We are reversing that.
Order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
How can it possibly be in order for a government minister to use a patsy question from one of their backbenchers to talk about the previous government being obsessed with something? That's nothing to do with what the situation that the minister inherited or any factual or objective reasoning as to the challenges they may have had in their portfolio. Previous speakers have been very clear that patsy questions can't be used to attack the other side.
Word it, Mr Speaker.
I just want to make the comment. You're quite right. I was busy trying to work out what the response should be to the point of order that was previously occurring. We're only 3 questions now into things. One sup on, not even one sup on the third question, and there are multiple points of order that have to be considered. I'm in the process of considering it. I missed that. If the member could stick to
I'll reword it.
The bounds of standing orders.
The previous government was very interested in imposing untargeted speed limits.
Mr. Speaker.
I agree. That's
It's not even a fact.
Assert what the previous government was interested in at all. He wasn't a member of that government. He cannot speak for that government.
I think, no, we're not going to have any more on this. Just do what has been asked, which is stick to the bounds of standing orders when you're answering a question.
Mr. Speaker, we are focused on making it easier for people to get from A to B as quickly and as efficiently as possible to help drive economic growth and productivity.
How will this benefit the people of Wairarapa?
Well, Mr. Speaker, not after this morning's announcement, he isn't. We have announced this morning, Mr. Speaker, that the speed limit on State Highway 2 between Featherston and Masterton will return to 100 kilometres per hour tonight or overnight. Mr. Speaker, previous members of this House, including Associate Ministers of Transport, have claimed this is not able to be done. We changed the rule in relation to the setting of speeds, and it will now happen.
Point of order, Dr. Duncan Webb.
The member is once again taking a swipe at members of the House in his answer. What former Associate Ministers may or may not have done is entirely irrelevant to the question of speed limits in the Wairarapa.
No, I don't think so, because the continuity of any ministry goes beyond the individuals who are in it. And for a government not to be able to refer to past decisions, or one parliament not be able to refer to past decisions as was referred, would be unacceptable. So I think you're being a little bit too concerned, and perhaps even going to a point of identification that was not in the answer being given.
Well, no, because he actually made statements about what the former minister had said and whether things could be done or not, which had nothing to do with the answer whatsoever.
Well, but it does have a lot to do with the reason for the action, which is the basis of the question. Mike Buttrick.
What other areas will benefit from quicker and more efficient travel?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've announced 38 roads for which the speed limits will revert back to what they were pre-2020. That will take effect in relation to Wairarapa from tonight and in relation to the other 37 between now and the 1st of July. There are also 49 further sections of state highways that will go out for public consultation. These will run for 6 weeks. In relation to local roads, councils have until the 1st of May 2025 to advise NZTA of the roads subject to reversal under the new rules. And I should note in passing, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Simeon Brown, the former Minister, for his hard work in this area.
Supplementary.
Mike Buttrick.
How has the Minister taken into account safety?
Mr. Speaker, safety is important, and the new rule requires variable speed limits outside schools during pick-up and drop-off times. And that is important, but we're also focused on the leading factors in road deaths, which is drugs and alcohol. And so the Land Transport Drug Driving Bill passed its second reading last night, which brings New Zealand into line with other jurisdictions in which we will be able to test people by the roadside for whether or not they have recently used drugs. And I believe we will look back in a few years' time and regard this move in a similar way to the way in which we regard blood alcohol testing, which is a perfectly normal part of life, controversial when first introduced amongst some, but actually par for the course. And the idea that you can drive on our roads and not be tested regularly, or at least have the chance of being tested regularly whilst being high, is nuts, and we are changing that. And at the same time, we are increasing the amount of breath tests done by the police, and that is an extremely important move.
Just in response to the point of order by Karamiti's March, it would be useful if all those who are asking supplementary questions did have a look at 197.5 of Speaker's rulings. Question. Supplementary, the Honourable Winston Peters.
Is the Minister saying that these speed limit increases are strategically and carefully designed for so many roads and not haphazardly and blanketly applied when a former administration increased the speed limit and 151 people more that year died under a former Labor administration?
It's fair to say, sir, that the blanket approach has been changed, and NZTA is now far more targeted about the particular sections of state highway that are dangerous, and the consultation on some of those roads begins right away. There will be some sections that stay where they're at, but there will be big chunks of state highways that revert back to what they were.
Question 4, Chloe Swarbrick.
To the Prime Minister, e tautoko ana ia I ngā kōrero me ngā mahi katoa a tōna kāwanatanga?
Yes, and especially our action to increase speed limits so that Kiwis can get to where they need to go to faster. If we want to go for growth, we need to get serious about powering up our regions. That's why we're so pleased with the changes that the Minister has just outlined in the Wairarapa this morning. It's all part of our plan to end a culture of no and the culture of slow. And my message on the other side, if you're serious about growth and getting Kiwis moving faster, back our changes and back the communities who are sick of being slowed down.
Is it still our country's negotiating position on the international stage to phase out fossil fuels and to phase out subsidies for fossil fuels?
We have not had a discussion about subsidies for fossil fuels, a debate, discussion or decisions being made in Cabinet at all.
Is the Prime Minister aware that the agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability, which his Trade Minister announced we'd signed last year, requires that we do not subsidise, de-risk or provide any backstop support whatsoever for fossil fuel exploration or import?
Well, we honour our trade obligations, and as I said, there hasn't been any decision, discussion or debate happening in Cabinet on that topic.
So then can the Prime Minister rule out that his government will be underwriting or providing any form of subsidy for fossil fuel exploration or import?
What I can rule in is that we're going to be a government that actually doubles the amount of renewable energy in this country, and we make sure that we also can keep the lights on and keep electricity abundant and affordable for New Zealanders. And we are going to use gas, whether it's domestically or imported.
Can the Prime Minister be straight up with the country and tell us whether he will rule out subsidising fossil fuels?
As I said, we haven't had any debate, discussion or decisions made in Cabinet on that subject.
Can the Prime Minister be straight up with the country and tell us whether he is open to subsidising fossil fuel exploration or import in this country?
We work as a government, we have Cabinet conversations and decisions, and we take them as a Cabinet. And as a result, what I'd say to you, we haven't had any conversation on that subject.
Just make the point that in asking those questions, there was clearly an inference in the start of those questions that the member needs to think about in terms of standing orders and also Speaker's rulings. Question number 5, Honourable Barbara Edmonds.
Malole soifua manuia, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. What responsibility, if any, does she have for economic growth, and does the current recession reflect on her execution of that responsibility?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Mr Speaker, like all ministers in this pro-growth government, I have a responsibility to look across my portfolio for opportunities to support and promote economic growth. In the case of finance, that means in particular, among other things, ensuring macroeconomic and fiscal settings are supportive of growth. For example, having low and stable inflation, which in recent years has definitely not been the case, but which has now been brought back in target, and working to bring discipline in our fiscal policies to support interest rate reductions, which have come down 125 basis points since this government was elected. To the second part of the question, no. But it perhaps reflects on some people's execution of their responsibilities, people whose big spending pushed inflation to 7.3% and required 525 basis point of interest rate hikes to bring it down. Those would be ministers in the previous government. I don't take responsibility for the damage they did to the New Zealand economy. I do take responsibility for fixing it.
Why did it take a recession, record net migration levels, higher unemployment for her to realise that she needed a plan for economic growth?
It didn't.
Supplementary. Why did the Treasury revise down its growth forecast for 2025 from 2.7 in the budget economic fiscal update last year, to 1.6% only 6 months after her budget?
As I've explained to that member previously, the Treasury is perpetually revising its forecasts. What it has acknowledged is that its estimates of future productivity rates and how quickly the New Zealand economy would bounce back from a period of corrosively high inflation and extraordinary interest rate hikes was overly optimistic. And in fact, the case is they now had to get real about the damage that the last government's policies have done to our economy and the mountain we have to climb to get New Zealand out of it.
So who was right? The Prime Minister who said in the House yesterday that, quote, "We don't have the luxury to turn off growth after 3 years of recession," unquote, or the Treasury's chief economist who said today that over the last 3 years we have had growth with the exception of a recession based on the last 2 quarters?
In my experience, the Prime Minister's always right.
Supplementary. Does she have confidence in the Minister for Economic Growth when that same person delivered the sharpest recession, excluding COVID, since the early 1990s?
Mr. Speaker, I have utmost confidence in her, but I also completely and utterly reject the economically ignorant accusation in that supplementary. And I ask of that member, if the job she wants to do as opposition finance spokesperson is to try and fool New Zealanders into thinking that Labor had nothing to do with the damage done to our economy, then she is taking New Zealanders for fools. They know you mismanaged the economy and they elected us to clean up the mess, and that's exactly what we are doing.
Question number 6, Debbie Nauru-Wapaka.
Tēnā koe te pika. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by all his government's statements and actions?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes.
Supplementary. Will he guarantee that his Invest New Zealand initiative will not lead to the foreign ownership of public assets if he is re-elected next term?
Well, what I can guarantee is it's going to get infrastructure built quicker, it's going to get renewable energy projects built faster, and anything else that means that we can actually deliver for New Zealanders, Māori or non-Māori, who actually want higher incomes, they want better housing, they want better health outcomes, better education outcomes. So we're going to do whatever it takes to power up growth in New Zealand, period.
Point of order.
Rauri Waititi.
I don't even think he came close to remotely answering that question around whether he can guarantee New Zealanders that foreign ownership of public assets will not happen in the next term.
Yes,
not once.
The problem is, it's a very political question, if you think about it, because it would simply mean that the opposition can require a minister to guarantee something that was their policy, not the minister's, and that would put the whole point of question time somewhat into question. So I think the answer was acceptable.
Catch up.
Supplementary. What role will Te Tiriti o Waitangi play in his plan Open Up Aotearoa to foreign corporate exploitation through Invest New Zealand?
No, you can't. No, start again.
Kapan. He patai anō. What role will Te Tiriti o Waitangi play in his plan Open Up Aotearoa through Invest New Zealand?
Well, this is a government that will honour the treaty, but what I'd say is that the iwi partners that we have talked to are very open to partnering and working with pools of international capital and domestic capital to build infrastructure and to do things that advance the well-being of their hapu and whānau.
Supplementary. Does it make a difference that he is voting against the Treaty Principles Bill when he has already guaranteed his support for the Regulatory Standards Bill, which will limit treaty clauses in future legislation?
Doesn't do that.
Well, our position is very well understood on the Treaty Principles Bill, and I refute the assertion that that's what the Regulatory Standards Bill is doing.
Supplementary.
Waititi.
Does he agree with the Police Commissioner that scrapping the top iwi police role does not diminish the importance of that role?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Does he agree with his Police Commissioner that scrapping the top iwi police role does not diminish the importance of that role?
All I'd say is I fully support our excellent Police Commissioner and I back the police and what they're doing, and I think he's doing an exceptionally good job to make sure that he's cracking down on crime, and I back all of our police, including the Police Commissioner.
Given that answer, given that iwi police partnerships are the only successful police initiative at reducing family violence in Māori communities, such as in Te Hiku and Te Tairāwhiti, which have seen a 15 to 19% decrease against all trends, how can he justify his government scrapping such a vital role?
Investing in the front line.
Well, I reject the characterisation of that question and the accusation in it. What I'd say to you is what I said before. I back the Police Commissioner. He's an outstanding individual. He's leading incredibly strongly, and he's backing the frontline officers who are doing a very difficult job.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Rawiri Waititi.
Can you clarify what accusation I have made when the facts and the data are clear in that particular question?
Well, I think the accusation was that it was a government decision.
And even the
But
only
clearly
way.
on police matters it's not.
Supplementary question.
Winston Peters.
Does that mean the Prime Minister and his ministers and his government support the police's Operation Trolley in Rotorua against thieves and against the views of Mr Rawiri, who supports them?
No.
Absolutely. We back the police on that issue as well.
That's not a reasonable question.
No, they're not. They're just like you.
Point of order, Te Nauru Wapaka.
197(5). I remind and seek your guidance. The whole idea of supplementary questions is not to make a range of political statements about an issue, but to dig into an issue to test a minister's answer.
Yes, I've reiterated that today.
Well, sorry, if I could speak again seeking your guidance. I'm the second.
Now, hang on. Just to make it clear, Mr Waititi's question asked about a decision that had been made and suggested the decision to be made by the government. It clearly hasn't been made by the government.
Just through the Speaker, my question was actually in regards to the Deputy Prime Minister's statement, specifically directed at Rawiri Waititi. Now, there is not, and I just want to remind, and I know that my colleague beside me has also sought your guidance, is the whole idea of a supplementary question is not to make a range of political statements. He made a statement about Rawiri Waititi and Rotorua, which is factually incorrect, not to say, but also wasn't used to dig to the issue of the question we laid. So I'm seeking your guidance.
And I rejected the question at the time, and I think you've now made very clear why it was rejected. Point of order, Honourable Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you very much. You did indeed attempt to indicate that question was inappropriate, but by the time you had tried that, the question had been asked and answered. And so, in effect, there was nothing done about it.
No, that's
and
not
so
true. It won't appear in the Hansard record. It's ruled out.
The issue I have, sir, is that unless the point is made clearly, because I would have heard it and seen it because I'm right here, but many of the members in the House were unaware, hence the point of order. If members in this House are unaware of your attempt to, in your words, shut the question down, given that the Prime Minister actually answered it in full, members of the public watching would be unaware. Now, whilst technically it might be stripped from the Hansard, no one else knows that you took action against that question. And our concern is, sir, that even if it had been completed, if the point is not made, then it's just going to be repeated, as we saw pretty much through the entirety of last year.
Right, well, thank you for that accusation. I'll take it on board. Penny Henare.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Is he committed to equitable health care for all New Zealanders? If not, why not?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Simeon Brown.
Mr Speaker, my priority as the Minister of Health is ensuring that all New Zealanders have access to timely, quality health care. This government has invested more in health services than ever before, an additional $16.88 billion, and my expectation is that those services are delivered based on the need. Kiwis rightfully expect to see their doctor or attend emergency departments without long waits and get the surgeries they need as quickly as possible. My focus and the focus of this government is on ensuring that those expectations are met and delivered upon for all New Zealanders.
Supplementary. To the Minister, are top health researchers correct in saying, quote, health systems that rely on funding via private insurance are less accessible, less efficient, less equitable and generally have worse health outcomes, end quote, and if not, why not?
Well, Mr Speaker, many New Zealanders rely on our public health system, and many New Zealanders have private health insurance. And the private health companies do an amazing job, as do our public health system, to ensure that New Zealanders can access the timely, quality care that they need so they can live healthy lives. That's my focus as Minister of Health.
Supplementary. To the Health Minister. Is Health Advocate Malcolm Mulholland correct that, quote, opening the health system up to more private sector involvement would only benefit the well-off? And if not, why not?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Labor Party is in a very dark and conspiratorial place. I mean, we are focused on delivering the quality and timely health care that New Zealanders need and focusing the system on results. This government has invested a record $16.88 billion into our public health system, but I also say there are many, many parts of our healthcare system in New Zealand which are operated by the private sector, our entire GP system, our doctors, our doctor clinics, and I thank them for the work that they do delivering health care for New Zealanders.
Supplementary.
Supplementary, Penny Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, then can you explain to New Zealanders why they are waiting longer for health appointments and paying more for doctors' appointments?
Well, Mr. Speaker, because we've inherited a system which the last government decided to restructure during a pandemic. Instead of focusing on outcomes, they were focused on bureaucracy. And my focus is on getting the outcomes that New Zealanders need.
Supplementary.
The Honourable David Seymour. Hang on, just wait for a bit of quiet.
Is the Minister aware of the highly celebrated and very innovative partnership between the Hapu Ngāti Whatua or Orake and NIB, private insurer, to provide insurance to the Hapu's members? And could understanding such real-world examples be helpful in such tasks as retaining the seat of Tamaki Makaurau?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that question. And yes, there are many, many examples across our healthcare system of partnerships which the private sector is part of delivering. But what I can say is my job as Minister of Health is making sure that all New Zealanders have the access to the timely and quality care that they deserve. And this government has invested record amounts, and we will focus the system on delivering that.
Supplementary.
Point of order, Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you very much. I thought I'd give you the opportunity, but...
It's very generous of you.
Thank you.
Extraordinarily generous.
That question
But
at the end
very
of
appreciative. Carry on.
clearly had a swipe at the member on the opposition asking the question. How on earth is it appropriate that a government minister can ask a question of another minister that includes an inference of an electoral result relating to the member asking the question? How is it appropriate?
I'll have a look at it offline and come back to you. Penny Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, does he agree with David Seymour's State of the Nation speech, which asked if we should, quote, allow people to opt out of the public healthcare system and take their portion of funding with them so they can go private, end quote, and if not, what's the Minister going to do to prevent the health system from being defunded and privatised?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is not the government's position, but what we are focused on doing is about focusing it on delivering the outcomes that New Zealanders need: faster specialist appointments, doctor visits quicker, making sure there are more elective surgeries being completed. We have invested a record amount of funding in our public health system, and now we need to focus on making sure it is delivering the results that Kiwis deserve and expect.
Right Honourable Winston Peters.
I can ask the Minister whether he'll deal with the real issue here, though, in particular. Will he help restore Mr Henari's health by getting his electoral seat back that was stolen off?
That question is out of order. Question 8, Carl Bates.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Education and asks, what actions has the government taken to lift achievement in literacy and numeracy as part of its plan to teach the basics brilliantly?
The Honourable Erica Stanford.
Mr Speaker, with the 2025 school year kicking off, this government is relentlessly focused on lifting student achievement and closing the equity gap in classrooms by teaching the basics brilliantly. From this term, parents can expect their children to benefit from a new year-by-year knowledge-rich curriculum grounded in the science of learning, structured approach to literacy and numeracy, new classroom resources, targeted interventions for kids who need extra help, teachers' professional learning and development, and the rollout of a phonics check.
Supplementary. What changes have been made to the curriculum?
Mr. Speaker, this year 65,000 young New Zealanders starting school will benefit from an internationally comparable, knowledge-rich and structured curriculum in English and maths that has been very well received by the sector. Parents will know exactly what their children are learning each year in school in English and maths. And they will no matter which school or classroom in the country they are a part of, they will receive exactly the same teaching and learning from the same high-quality curriculum.
Supplementary. What changes can parents expect for how their kids are learning to read and write?
Mr. Speaker, every single child in year 0 to 3 learning to read will start school this year being taught to read using structured literacy, including the young 6-year-old Angus Bates, who's in the gallery today. 18,000 teachers have already been trained or are in training. Phonics checks are available after 20 and 40 weeks at school to catch our young learners who are falling behind. Schools across the country are getting up to $5,000 for additional structured literacy resources each year for 4 years. And finally, Mr. Speaker, 970 schools applied for and received staffing allocations for reading intervention teachers for young learners who are falling behind in their reading.
Supplementary. What changes can parents expect for how their kids are learning mathematics this year?
Mr. Speaker, nearly 500,000 maths workbooks, textbooks and teacher guides are being shipped to primary and intermediate schools around New Zealand, where they will benefit over 430,000 students as they engage with their new maths curriculum this year. High-quality curriculum-aligned resources will not only support teachers to implement the new curriculum, but increase the consistency of teaching and learning. They are supplemented by teacher professional learning and development in maths, and our Maths Acceleration trial for Year 7 and 8 students set to benefit 3,000 of them. Mr. Speaker, a world-leading education system is a key driver for our economic growth, and we need all children to be proficient in reading, writing and maths, which is why we are so unashamedly focused on teaching the basics brilliantly.
Question 9, the Honourable Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Associate Minister of Housing, does he agree with Andrew Crisp, Chief Executive of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, who said that, quote, both the register and people that apply does not represent effectively severe housing deprivation, end quote? If so, is he confident that the need for emergency housing has reduced?
The Honourable Tama Potaka.
E te maunga o te whare, I acknowledge that tens of thousands of New Zealanders, disproportionately Māori, are doing it tough with the cost of living crisis and severe housing challenges. Limb 1 of the question is unnecessarily ambiguous because it conflates the social housing waitlist with emergency housing and severe housing deprivation, all of which have different characteristics. In relation to Limb 2, blue sheets, Mr. Speaker, the country has reached the government target 8, reducing by 81% the number of households living in emergency housing. Emergency housing, I remain confident, remains an option for New Zealanders with genuine need for short-term stay, temporary accommodation in most towns and cities.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order, the Honourable Kieran McAnulty.
The Minister made reference to the first leg of that question. This is a question on notice and has been verified by the Clerk's office. If the quote used was ambiguous or disingenuous, as the Minister alluded to, the Clerk's office wouldn't have allowed it. It is a direct quote from the annual report annual review of housing and the social services report. It was a direct response to questions about social housing and emergency housing, and that was provided in the verification.
Yeah, there's no need, I think, at this stage. You can decide in a minute. But the point here is that the question certainly is verified as being correct. The answer from the Minister suggested that there was a conflation in the assertions in the question, and that he attempted to answer that, or he did answer it with answering to two parts of it in explanation. I don't think there was a problem with that.
He dismissed the quote, that's the point.
I don't think he dismissed the quote. What he said is that it could be taken in different ways, which is not an unreasonable answer. You have another supplementary?
Supplementary. Does he seriously think that the need for emergency housing in this country has been reduced to only 591 households?
E te maunga o te whare. I'm very proud that this government has taken serious action to ensure that the number of households in emergency housing have reduced by over 80%. And I'm particularly comfortable and enthusiastic that over 2,500 children have left emergency housing since we came into administration. I'm very serious about that.
There are members over there asking questions. They can stand and take a supplementary if they want, but not by barracking across the House. The Minister will start his answer again.
Mr. Speaker, can I have the question again, please?
Supplementary. Will he admit that by stopping people from entering emergency housing, as frontline agencies have told him is happening, he is masking the true need for housing and overseeing a growing homelessness crisis in this country?
Mr. Speaker, in most towns and cities in this country, those people who have a genuine need for short-term stay and temporary accommodation known as emergency housing have a pathway to do that. Yes, there is a responsibility framework that goes with that, but there are also a number of other support products and brokering services that enables people to stay out of emergency housing and be placed in social service, transitional housing and social housing and other options.
Supplementary.
Point of order.
Supplementary.
Supplementary, the Honourable Chris Bishop.
To the Associate Minister of Housing, can you explain to the House how the Priority 1 policy, which says that if you are in emergency housing for a long period of time and have kids, you should get a first preference into a social house, works in practice?
It's among Ailsa Whare. In April last year, we took the decision, known as Priority 1, to fast-track those people who have children and living in emergency housing for longer than 12 weeks into essentially a priority on the social housing waitlist. That has resulted in over 900 families and around 2,000 tamariki who have now been moved from that moral, fiscal, social, dank, dark catastrophe that was curated prior to us coming into administration.
Supplementary.
Supplementary, the Honourable Kieran McNulty.
Who should New Zealanders believe? Agencies working on the front line that told the Minister to his face that his policy changes are stopping people getting the emergency housing they need and is leaving them on the street, or the Minister who focuses on the savings of $1 million a week?
It's among Ailsa Whare. I acknowledge there is genuine concern that has been expressed to me by a number of social service providers and others around the health and housing crisis that continues to confront many New Zealanders, disproportionately Māori. We have also committed to continuing a build program with Kāinga Ora, over 1,500 net homes to be built, the support for community housing providers with 1,500 additional funded places over the next couple of years, and others like Tainui and many Māori housing providers with another 300 affordable rentals to be built in the next couple of years. We acknowledge that there are genuine concerns and are also taking steps in order to ensure that going for housing growth, the housing renaissance led by the Manu Pūtea Nicola Willis and the Manu Pihopa Chris Bishop is carried through.
Supplementary.
Supplementary.
Is it not actually the case that he is simply stopping people from entering emergency housing to reduce costs instead of actually reducing the need for emergency housing in the first place?
It's a maanga Ailsa Whare. It is actually the case that we have seen a reduction of nearly 2,500 tamariki living in emergency housing, and we've also seen nearly 2,000 tamariki under Priority 1 go to dry, warm homes. That is actually the case.
You should be ashamed, Minister. They're on the street.
Supplementary question, the right honourable Cepeda.
Can I ask the Minister, how many of those people would have been housed if the 100,000 homes promise had been kept?
I think we'll leave that. Thank you. That's the points made. Nancy Lou, question
Mr.
10.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Trade and Investment. What recent announcements has the government made about boosting economic growth?
Well, Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister announced the establishment of Invest New Zealand as the country's one-stop shop for attracting highly productive capital. By increasing foreign direct investment, we'll accelerate the growth of New Zealand businesses, create better and higher paying jobs, and provide the infrastructure that New Zealanders need.
Supplementary. Why has the government decided to set up Invest New Zealand?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not getting our fair share of international investment. Currently, New Zealand's stock of foreign direct investment sits at 38% of GDP compared to an OECD average of 50% of GDP. Last year, by comparison, New Zealand's foreign direct investment grew by 5% compared to Singapore at 31%. The government's committed to increasing direct investment and growing the New Zealand economy so that Kiwis get their fair share and the services that come with that.
Supplementary. What will Invest New Zealand do?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Invest New Zealand will be a new agency modelled on the Irish and Singaporean best practice. It'll drive direct investment into high potential sectors to boost New Zealand's innovation in productivity, increase R&D investment in New Zealand by overseas companies, making us attractive and increasing the value of our exports, and streamline processes to significantly increase funding for new and existing businesses and public and private sector projects.
Supplementary. Why is attracting foreign investment important for the economy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, because the initiative will unlock tens of billions of dollars in global investment opportunities that support the delivery of key road and energy projects, creating better paying jobs, support and create new businesses, and help the government deliver core infrastructure the country needs. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said, this year is about growing the economy. Invest New Zealand is part of the government's plan to make all New Zealanders better off.
Question 11. Question Tagariri Manuel.
Happy New Year te maanga o te whare. My question is to the Minister for Tourism and Hospitality. How many additional tourists are projected to visit New Zealand as a result of the digital nomads policy? And what, if any, is the estimated amount of economic benefit from this policy?
The Honourable Louise Upson.
Mr. Speaker, encouraging digital nomads to stay for up to 9 months is part of this government's plan to unlock economic growth by making New Zealand a more attractive place for people to work remotely while travelling. Tourism is New Zealand's second largest export earner, generating almost $11 billion and creating nearly 200,000 jobs. Unfortunately, we are only at 86% of pre-COVID 2019 numbers, and this policy will help get New Zealand back on track. While it's hard to predict specific numbers, we do know from overseas examples that staycations are extraordinarily popular. Immigration New Zealand has already seen an incredible amount of interest just since Monday, when there were over 4,000 hits on the first day we announced this policy. This has more than doubled, so over 8,000 yesterday. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand is open for business. On this side of the House, we are pulling every lever to encourage more people to visit.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, it was a question on notice. I think the Minister had two parts. I think the Minister effectively argued that she couldn't answer the first part, she didn't know, but she didn't address the second part at all. It is a question on notice.
Well, what would you say is the second part?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I haven't read it out for you if you'd like.
I need to know. I know what's in it.
It asked her how many
you're concerned about.
Asked her how many people were going to visit. She said she didn't know, and what the economic benefit of the policy was going to, what the estimated amount of economic benefit from the policy was going to be. She didn't address that.
Well, I think in talking about trying to bridge the gap between pre-COVID numbers and current numbers, that would be a reasonable attempt. Getting a dollar amount is pretty darn difficult if you've already said you're not sure how many might end up coming here. Do we have another question? Question Tagariri Manuel.
Given we're open for business, does she plan to address current infrastructure gaps in regions like Ikaroa Rāwhiti, which are already under strain, to ensure that the tourism sector in our regions can thrive while supporting any potential influx?
Mr. Speaker, I would have thought that that member would be really excited about the possibility of more visitors coming into Hawke's Bay, into Wairarapa, into Gisborne, to see the very beautiful environment that we have. We're talking about digital nomads. They'll be travelling around the country. Every dollar they spend is $1 in GST and good for New Zealand.
Did that government increase the international visitor levy by 185% to prop up government books?
Mr Speaker, we have increased the international visitors levy. We are open for business. We are very keen to see more visitors come to New Zealand, including digital nomads. I, for one, hope they come to my electorate, and I would have thought that member hopes they come to hers as well.
Supplementary.
Supplementary, the Honourable Erica Stanford.
So the Minister, what other feedback has the Minister seen on the digital nomad announcement?
Mr Speaker, General Manager of SCM Travel in New Zealand, Kelly Thomas, said there was an increasing demand for digital nomad schemes from employees who want to blend both business with pleasure. Meanwhile, Infometrics principal economist Brad Olsen has said, "I'm not sure if there's any real downsides to this policy in the short term, and that this might put New Zealand on the map a bit more." Mr Speaker, it hasn't all been positive, though. So, strangely, despite the Labour leader recently calling digital nomads in New Zealand a vision worth fighting for, I heard that idea described as a stupid economic growth strategy this morning by one of News Talk ZB's regular commentators, and that, of course, was Ginny Anderson.
Supplementary.
Hang on a minute. Sorry. We've had a lot of discussion today about the way in which questions shouldn't be used to attack the opposition. I think when it comes to answering a question about comments that were made, talking about a comment that has been made, even on this day, is not unreasonable. Kusha Tangariri Manu.
Mr Speaker, while obviously being a great supporter of tourism, I'm gravely aware of how fragile our infrastructure is. So, has all the income from the levy since October 1st, 2024 been invested back into infrastructure and conservation?
Good question.
Mr Speaker, that member will have to just wait and see where the investment goes, and I'm sure she'll be pleased when we say so.
Kusha Tangariri Manu.
Does she hope any potential tourists will fill the gap left by 128,000 Kiwis who left the country in the year ended November 24, which was the highest on record?
Mr Speaker, I'm very excited to be the Minister for Tourism and Hospitality and welcoming visitors to New Zealand with open arms. It's unfortunate that side doesn't seem to want them.
Question number 12, Ricardo Mendes March.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction. Does she accept that children living in material hardship are more likely to do poor in school due to a lack of food? If so, why did the government remove food insecurity from the child poverty-related indicators?
Mr Speaker, to the first part of the question, yes. And that's why our government has continued to invest in the things that reduce material hardship, lift educational achievement and help families get ahead. Food insecurity continues to be measured and remains an indicator under our Children's Child and Youth Strategy. I'm also proud that we have extended the Healthy School Lunches program to 10,000 children, so more students will have access to food. Our efforts to help more parents into work will also lift household incomes and improve their ability to put food on the table. Reducing material hardship is a key priority in our Child and Youth Strategy, which is why we have a target to lift 17,000 more children out of material hardship by 2027.
Supplementary. Will the number of children living in material hardship decrease at the same or higher rate than the Prime Minister's promised economic growth? If not, are children living in poverty not going to benefit from economic growth at the same rate as the rest of the population?
Mr Speaker, economic growth is a fantastic opportunity because, of course, we will see jobs being created and we will see more parents in work, which means fewer children in hardship.
Is she saying then that we're expected to see a decline in the number of children living in material hardship equal or greater to the amount the economy grows?
Well, they go together because the more the economy grows, the more jobs there are, the more opportunities there are for parents, the fewer parents that we will have on benefit, they'll have greater incomes and have better ability to provide for their children, which will mean fewer children in material hardship.
Is it true that material hardship for children will continue to increase under her watch until the rest of this Parliament's term?
Mr. Speaker, I just said in my answer to the primary question that we have a target to reduce the number of children living in material hardship. I hope the member has noticed that we have had very challenging economic times, including recessionary conditions, and families have been doing it incredibly tough. And I do want to acknowledge at the start of the school year, it's incredibly tough for parents. That's why we are focused on economic growth. That's why we are focused on creating more jobs and enabling more families to look after their children so that there will be fewer children in material hardship.
Will the government continue referring people to food banks while denying ongoing funding to food banks like the Auckland City Mission, or are kids going hungry just the necessary casualty of the government outsourcing basic social services to underfunded charities in the private sector?
Mr. Speaker, the government is continuing to fund organisations like the Auckland City Mission. As I said, I accept that it is incredibly challenging right now. I would like to stand here and say that we didn't inherit a period of prolific government spending that has led to incredibly challenging economic times that mean more families are doing it tough. But our focus on this side of the House is fixing it.
That concludes oral questions. We'll take a short pause before moving to the Prime Minister's statement.